AJ, what's your thoughts? Do I seem...
You're loud and clear, Lou.
Okay, great. I see some people that I know. I see Terry. Hi, Terry. Hi, Carter. David Cohen. You're not the David Cohen from LinkedIn London, are you? Suspect not, because that's probably what you wouldn't put in there. But so let me kind of set the stage here. Every month we give a quick introduction to performance-based hiring, called the sneak peek. And part of that, and it's somewhat of an infomercial, but it really does get into the details. So we actually you get some tips out of it. But the bigger picture is they would like you to attend our full training class and send, if you're a recruiting manager, send all your recruiters, and if you're a hiring manager, send every person in your company there. And I know Terry Tucker has pulled that off at a pretty good company, so I thank you, Terry. Terry, you might want to just put in chat what you want to get out of this. I know you come to this a lot, so you hear a lot of different things. But what I want to do today is I'm going to kind of put a little twist on what I normally do, because LinkedIn has what's called their industry conference for their corporate clients. It's called Talent Connect. And Talent Connect is in the UK. No, excuse me, it's the UK next month. Next week it's in San Francisco. So I'm going to be presenting at Talent Connect an idea on how to measure quality of hire and the ROI of that. So I'm going to do that today, and I'm kind of pushing the envelope a little bit here because this gets a little bit techy, but I think it's important that, and I'll make the contention up front, is that I think lack of good metrics and lack of the right strategy is the primary reason why companies find it difficult to hire people. Now, I think the strategy and the metrics then drive the tactics and process, and I think we're all look to try to get better things, but I'm going to contend there's some issues there. So let me kind of just go through this process with you. Feel free to ask questions. I know that we had a few people who were on earlier who wanted to chat. If you raise your hand, type into the chat area anything that you want to chat about, and JJ has the ability to unmute anybody. So we have that limited power here. So let's kind of get right into it. I want to ask a few questions. So this is where I need you in the chat area. I want you to just make the general statement, is the cost that you use for hiring people considered at your company an investment or an expense? Just let me ask you that question. Just with the word, is the cost for hiring at your company considered an investment or an expense? You got to put one or two words. Okay, if it's an investment, let me ask you this. If it's an investment, so you got to put yes or no. Do you track the ROI of that investment? So if it's an investment, do you actually track the ROI? Okay, so let me just say that, which means that cost per hire, because this is what typically does, is most companies, and I've been at LinkedIn Talent Connect, and I've been at least 50, maybe 100 different industry conferences, most recruiting leaders get excited about reducing cost per hire. Well, the truth is, maybe you have to increase the cost per hire, but if you get a better quality candidate, that becomes an ROI. So I just want to make the statement is very few companies, and I haven't ever seen anybody who actually looks at the ROI, which means you have to measure quality of hire to make the investment worthwhile. So if anybody is doing that, and I see Stephanie says she's doing it, I think somebody else said yes too, but I can't, was going to. Liz, I think, said it as well. I'd like to chat with you separately, or else we can kind of talk about it right after this, is how are you measuring quality of hire and how are you measuring your ROI, because that's what we're going to do today. At least I'm going to show you a way to do it. Now let me ask you a slightly different question. Think about the positions which JJ asked earlier. What's your most significant hiring challenge? And she said put something in there, and I know a few of you put it in there. For those positions where you have a hiring challenge or a recruiting challenge, are you in a surplus situation, meaning you have plenty of good candidates to choose from, you have to weed them out, or are you in a scarcity situation where you have to attract them? So for those when you have difficulty, are you in a surplus situation, you got plenty of good people to choose from, or scarcity? Okay, so just add to the third thing. So just tell you where I'm kind of going here. Well, I want to treat the expense for hiring. I think we all intellectually recognize that talent is an investment. I think most of us also agree that most people, managers, don't spend as much time on it, and if you got too many recs, you can't do it properly. I think most companies are intellectually would like to raise the talent bar, but their focus is on reducing costs and, hey, I got a budget, I can't do everything. I have a budget. So they're approving the budget. They're not getting an ROI expenditure. And the third part is we have a scarcity. Good people are hard to find. And I'm going to contend, so here's where I'd like to go is when you think about it, so now I just want to ask you the fourth question is, when you think about all the hiring that goes on at your company, is there a real desire to raise the talent bar, or by default are you just maintaining the current hiring level of people you've always hired? So let's say, is your really focus on raising the talent level of the people you hire, or is it really just cloning your existing workforce? Just want to get your sense here. So everybody wants to raise it. So let me ask you this, what are you doing? And I'm going to contend, so let me ask you another, well, let me just kind of make this statement. Everybody wants to raise it, but I'm going to contend, well, let me just also give you this URL. JJ, you could, why don't you put that bud URL dash ROI calc. Why don't you put that in the chat area, JJ, so people can at least play with it afterwards. We're going to go through how do you calculate the ROI of raising it. JJ will put that in shortly, hopefully. If not, I'll do it in a bit. So let me kind of make this statement here. So now I'm going to kind of disagree with everybody on the call here. I've only been working with companies as a recruiter for 35, 40 years. And I make the contention that while everybody says they want to raise the talent bar, what they really do is just maintain it. And let me kind of prove it. If you use skills-based job descriptions, you're maintaining it. You're not raising it, you're just maintaining it, because the best people don't have the skills listed on a job description. If you use a compensation range, because the better people want more money. So if you're trying to hire great people and pay them average salaries, you're not going to get there. So I make the contention, and not everyone agrees, other than when we kind of audit their processes, we see what happens, is most companies try to hire people efficiently at the lowest cost possible. They use traditional job descriptions, they filter out people, they have compensation ranges, they have hiring managers that like to have people who fit with our culture. Oh, we want people to fit with our culture. Well, if they want to fit with your culture, you're obviously maintaining your culture. If you want to raise your talent bar, they probably have a different culture. They probably have diverse backgrounds. So I'm going to make the contention that while everybody believes they want to raise the talent bar, and they say that, the reality is when you look at what they do, it's not at all what they do. And then when they have high volume hiring, and so if you have recruiters that are working 20, 30, or 40 recs at a company, there's no way. All they can do is be transactional and fill jobs, and they make it quick. Managers aren't engaged. Well, if managers are engaged and are promoted by how well they raise the talent bar, that might make some sense. But I'm going to contend that most companies, when you really look at what they do, they try to hire people just like they've always hired. They maintain their existing talent level. And sometimes they make mistakes because they go too fast or they give too many recs. And they treat hiring process as a budget item, as an expense. So let me just ask you a third question, because this is fundamental to raising the talent bar. How many of your hiring managers on their performance reviews, the number one item on their performance reviews is based on the quality of the people they hire? This is a hiring manager at your company or your clients. How many are rated and ranked on the quality of the people they hire? Yeah, I haven't seen any. That's where I say, if it really was raising the talent bar, let's assume that Deb was the manager. If Deb was a good manager, hey, Deb, you didn't do a very good job of raising the talent bar. Kelly, you didn't do a very good. Now, if Karen, you just hired 3 great people. You went out of your way to make sure you hired great people. You spent more time doing it. In fact, a high potential person needs probably a little extra coaching. And Karen, you're willing to do it. So when I look at what people say they do, and what actually happens is we maintain the status level and avoid mistakes. To raise the talent bar, I'm going to say you need a different process, a different strategy, and different metrics. That's what I want to talk about today. That's the idea. You're not going to fill seats quickly. You're not going to hire the best people who apply. You're going to hire the best available people. That's the process of performance-based hiring. That's what I want to do today, at least give you an introduction to that, but also make the cases. I think companies, when I look at job postings, and that's the easy way to do it, most job postings are designed to weed out the weak, not attract the best. So let's kind of, now I'm going to get a little bit techie here, so bear with me. You can use the calculator to get there. And feel free to ask questions, but I'm going to try to do this in 3 minutes to explain it because that's all I have time I got at LinkedIn Talent Connect. So it's the first time I've actually described this in public. What's the ROI of hiring a 15% better person, the actual financial impact of that? It turns out on a standard bell curve, 15% is what the average is of the top third. On just a normal distribution, if you got it, so 15%, and that's pretty reasonable. The top third is 15% better performer. So I went through some financial statistics here. I'm going to give you the quickie on them, and you can. A lot of this is public information. Revenue per employee is public information. Revenue. Exxon is 5.6 million. Apple is 2.2 million. GE is 477,000. That's public information. You can guess at the variable profit margin by just taking the average of the gross margin and the operating margin. For our sample company, let me just kind of use that as an example. For a sample company, and this is not unreasonable, so maybe software, a little bit of hardware, $600,000 per employee. Our calculator goes through this, so you can play with the calculator, put it in there. Variable profit margin, 40% is not unreasonable. When you multiply, so now here's the issue. You can multiply 600,000 times 40% to get $240,000, which is the average of all employees should generate in terms of variable profit every year for the company. If you divide that by the average salary, which is you can actually find that at SalaryList.com. So for our sample company, it's 100,000. It's usually between 75,000 and 125. So 100,000 isn't unreasonable. It's $2.40. So the $2.40 is for every dollar of compensation, that person should generate $2.40, or for a $100,000 person should generate $240,000 in profit. So I'm just kind of giving you that's the profit multiplier. So now I want to ask you a question. You can put this in chat. You can kind of put, because I want to kind of show you the magnitude of this. How many people, and if you're a big company, you can tell. If you're a small company, it doesn't matter, but you can just pick a client that you have. If you hire, so I'm going to ask you, how many people is your company going to hire? If you're a company, you can say it, or if you could take your biggest client, and you can say how many, you can not this, not you're going to, if you're a search firm, but your biggest client's going to hire X number of people. Just think about this. If you're going to hire 100 people next year, 2015, at $100,000 each, that's $10 million in additional expenditure each year, every year. So that's at $10 million. I don't think many companies spend that money as wisely as they could. So let me just ask you, in the chat area, how many people is your company in total going to be hiring next year? Just roughly. It doesn't have to be accurate. It's going to be 50, 100, 5,000. I'm working with clients that have, 500 to 1,000, 450. Got someone that's working 10,000. You start adding the numbers up, it gets to be 5, 10, $15, $20 million. If you're a search firm, it's a little bit different because you're a small company. But if you're at a bigger company, it's certainly going to be a heck of a lot bigger. So I just want to give the magnitude of it. But you can do it for one individual person. Let me kind of go through the numbers here. $10 million at $2.40, because that's what each salary generates, $2.40. That's $24 million in profit per year. Remember, I'm going through the financial ROI. The top third, which is 15% better, will generate $3.6 million more in profit per year. In total, that will be a little more than $14 million a year. Excuse me, $3.6 million per year over 4 years. Because remember, these people generate this every year, and four years is about right. Over 4 years, that's $14 million. So now the ROI, just to get you where I'm going here, I'm not going to stop in the mathematics for a moment here. The ROI is what does it cost me to generate $14 million in extra profit? If I do it my own way, it's not going to cost me anything different. But what would I do to hire people who are 15% better? I'm going to suggest, and I'm going to now go through how you do it. And this is the concept, the mathematical concept. Hiring for most companies, hiring people who are 15% better generates 200 to 500,000. That's not true. 200 to 500% ROI the first year. After that, because you've already done it, you don't have to pay any more costs. You got them in the game, so it becomes astronomical. So the ROI of hiring a top third person is phenomenal. And a lot of companies say they do it, but now I want to say, how do you do it? So I'm going to say there is a way, looking at the financial data of a company, to figure it out, but so which is kind of neat. But the reality is you still got to do it, which is a little bit harder. To raise the top third, you have to do different things. You have to have a different strategy. You have to be attracting people, not weeding them out. Because the top third, I will contend, is largely passive candidates. Active candidates are rarely, not always, but rarely in the top third, which are 15% better than average. You need a different process. You got to figure out, hey, what do the top third people do differently? You need to shift your sourcing, which is clearly more passive candidates. You have to offer these people, there's not one person in the top third who cares about a lateral transfer. So if you are posting individual job recs that say must have these skills, you will never hire someone in the top third. You will absolutely hire an average person. You might hire the best of average people, but be real frank, people who have all this, the top third has less skills. That's what puts them in the top third. They get more done with less skills. I know that's sometimes hard to buy in, but you got to convince a hiring manager, hey, if you want someone in the top third, they're not going to have all these skills. I'm going to show you how to make that switch, but nonetheless, that's the reality. It does require a partnership with the recruiter and the manager. In fact, it requires a partnership with the recruiter, the manager, and the candidate. But the candidate wasn't looking. You called this person at 10:30 in the morning. At 10:25, that person wasn't looking for a job. Well, how do you recruit that person? How do you convince this person this is a career move? They want more money. And then you lose candidates because they want more money. Well, how do you convince them, hey, it's not about the money, it's about the career? Let's have a conversation. So it's a different process. And you do need a system that considers all of these things, and it has to have metrics. That's what performance-based hiring is. It is a system. It covers all of these things. It does increase the ROI, and we can measure it. I'm giving you an overview of it, but that's what performance-based hiring is. It also requires a different strategy. So let me kind of, if you're in a scarcity strategy, so, and I'm going to contend most companies, again, I can look at the postings, if you're even a search firm, I can look at your postings, not everybody, because that's totally not true. There are some people who recognize if you're recruiting a passive candidate, you have to have a different strategy to do it. But let me kind of think of a big picture level on strategy. Here's kind of a neat little chart. When you think about the hiring process, there are 4 big steps to it. Every decision a candidate or a company makes can be divided into 4 steps. Step 1 is the having step, which I call the pass. This is what most job descriptions emphasize, what the person must have in terms of skills and experiences. Candidates put their resumes down, which put it on skills and experience. And everybody is filtered on their skills and experience. And I'm going to tell that's the most stupid thing you can do because the best people have less skills and experience. So if you use that as your first filter, there's no way you're going to raise the talent bar just by random luck, even though you might want to do it. So most companies say, oh, we want, instead of 5 years experience, we want 10 years experience. But that's not raising the talent bar, that's lowering the talent bar because you're offering someone a lateral transfer. Now, when you get a candidate on the phone, which is the second step, there's a discussion about what you give and what you get. Candidates say, what do I get? Recruiters say, here's what you get. And it's just giving it, and there's a negotiation on, okay, if you're not in this salary range, forget it. If the job title isn't right, forget it. If the location isn't right, forget it. So now you have this second layer of filter where it's negotiating the job before anybody even knows what the job is. Which, when you think of it, is pretty idiotic, but that's what we do. So if you're going after passive candidates and candidate says, I need 120, so that's too much money. But I know that person probably think 105 is a great career move, but you never get to that conversation. The third component is if you somehow get past these filters and you get a person who truly is in the top third, who can raise the talent bar, and you ask that person, why did you take our job over your competing jobs in that counteroffer, even though we didn't offer you the most money? I took it because it was the best career move, and I like the work, and I like the people. It's what they do. And if they do it well, what they can become. And I'm going to contend most companies who want to raise the talent bar, it's always scarcity. The high demand people, the best people, even in a job where there's a lot of them, the best people are always in high demand. In a job where there aren't a lot of them, it's even tougher. But most companies, by default, use a surplus strategy. So if you're a third-party recruiter and a hiring manager gives you a job rec filled with skills and experience, you're already starting off on the wrong foot. You'll never hire a great person. It'll just be you'll hire a good person. And I don't necessarily mean that they're bad people, but they're going to be as good as the people the company's already hired. And there's nothing wrong with that. But it's not raising a talent bar. It's people just like the company's hired traditionally. Because, hey, let's hire people just like we've always hired. What I suggest, and performance-based hiring reverses this. We suggest that for the best people there is a scarcity. We want to emphasize what people do and become. We want to eliminate the having, put the getting after you do the doing and becoming, not before. Emphasize what people do and describe what people become. We want to attract the best people based on what they do and become. We'll negotiate the getting after we discover this is a career move. To pull that off, though, we got to raise a bridge or lower the water. For the manager, we got to shift the decision to not what a person can have, but what a person can do. And for a candidate, we got to focus. It's not what you get; it's what you can do and become. So the recruiter, the middleman here, has got to finesse this whole thing. Because naturally, our ATS system, our legal system, our compliance system, our compensation system is all designed based on having and getting. And I'm going to contend that's the fundamental reason why companies clone people just like they have, why it's so difficult to raise the talent bar. To raise the talent bar, you have to have a different strategy and a different process. Big one is you got to think scarcity, you got to attract people in, you got to emphasize doing and becoming. Performance-based hiring is designed to do that. It wasn't initially built that way, but it was built because I've been a recruiter since 1978. I got an engineering degree, a manufacturing degree, an MBA. I was running a company when I was 32 years old. The only reason I became a recruiter is I started using recruiters who were making more money than I was, and I hated my boss. Literally, that was the short story. But as soon as I became a recruiter, the idea of, because I knew for 5 years, not a single job that either I had done personally or I had had people working for me. And I never even used a job description. Never knew how to do any of this stuff. I just started doing it. And it was always scarcity. We gave a 1-year guarantee out of the chute because they said, hey, if you're paying me a big fee, I got to give you a year guarantee. But after a couple of years, we realized that some people didn't make it, but those that did and those that got promoted, we realized, hey, we could just benchmark our best placements, and after 200 or 300 placements, we said, this is what happened. We just looked at what was the situation. In the first situation, we didn't use job descriptions. We used what we call performance-based job descriptions or performance profiles that define the career, what people needed to do. Number two, we knew that the best people were passive candidates. We had to find them through compelling advertising, compelling messages, and we had to recruit them and convince them it was a career move. Number three, I don't know about you guys have this, but this I didn't get right away. This took a while to get. My managers were not very good interviewers. I don't think I was a very good interviewer to begin with either. But I realized that I was wasting a lot of time by sending in candidates who were good that were interviewed improperly. I said, okay, I got to change that. So I spent really 3 or 4 years. Now, a lot of the work I do, as you can see, people think we have a great interviewing system, which it is, and I'll kind of give you a quick overview of it today. But you got to be a good interviewer to not only convince your candidate you know what you're talking about, but also to convince the manager you know what you're talking about, in addition to assess the candidate properly. We came up with 2 questions we called the performance-based interview. And then I never had enough money in the budget. So we came up with a process called the 30% solution. Stephanie, I'll give you a 30% increase, but it's not all going to be money. Part of it will be job stretch, part of it will be job growth, part of it will be compensation increase. But if the job doesn't represent a career move, if the stretch and growth aren't there, it doesn't matter what we pay you, it'll be a bad decision. That was performance-based hiring. It was a partnership with the recruiter, the manager, and the candidate. And when we take the assignment, we do not use job descriptions that list skills and experiences. And I'm going to do one more slide, and I'm going to open up for some questions, and we'll kind of go forward here. But you got to get a sense of where I'm going here. So let me just leave it at that for a moment. There's 2 things I want to do to get in here. I want to kind of get into sourcing, how you define the job, and how do you assess people. Just give you an overview. Does what I've said so far make sense? Or you think, hey, Lou is really a wild and crazy guy. I don't know how he got where he is. You can say that. Oh, you can't, Carter. Everyone else can. Carter already knows I'm wild and crazy. Okay, so let me kind of now give a landscape. Let's get into the details. So the idea that I have is you have to have an integrated system, which is performance-based hiring. You can't just do sourcing. You can't just do job spec. You have to do all this stuff together. And when you break down each of these pieces, none of them are really hard. They're actually kind of common sense. Thinking, doing, and becoming, of course it's common sense. Of course you got to interview well. Of course, at least to make sure you don't blow a good candidate. I mean, so what's the hard part is doing them all together and getting your managers to do them. So now I want to kind of think about sourcing, and I call it implementing an early bird sourcing strategy, because I think you need to change, that you have to change the mix. But I want to kind of define candidates on this blue curve. This blue curve represents the growth and satisfaction of an employee over time. And the far left, people, they just take a job, and this could be years, the chart. The far left, it's people, they took a good job, they're growing, they're learning, they're highly satisfied, and over time, if the job doesn't change, growth and satisfaction declines until it starts leveling off and it declines. And depending on where that person is, that determines this candidate's job hunting status. On the far left, they're super passive. Great job, very happy. I call them zone 1 from a career zone standpoint. They're super passive. Zone 2, they're explorers. Meaning if I call someone up, I call Christina up and say, hey, Christina, would you be open to explore a situation if it were clearly superior to what you're doing today? Guaranteed to get a yes. In our course, we have 20 things you can say to candidates to make sure they say yes. That's one of them. Christina, would you be open to explore a situation if it was clearly superior? Now, Christina will instantly say yes, but what do I get? Christina, let's be frank. If this job doesn't represent a career move, it doesn't matter what you get. Let's first see if it represents a career move. I got to force the doing and getting. I have to, or the doing and becoming. I got to get past that. But explorers will chat with you, and I'm going to give you the percentage in a minute of how many. A lot of them will, but they're interested in a real move. As the blue line declines, their satisfaction declines. They become tiptoers. So, for example, if I work with David and Christy on a previous job and we work well together, hey, Christy, I think I'm thinking of leaving just this job the next 6 months to a year. Things are going to start going crazy here. I think it's time to leave. Well, that's how people start networking. They talk to their previous coworkers and people they've worked with before. They just tiptoe to the market. But they've kind of, in their own minds, they start to say, yes, it's about to look. Then you have the very active. Hey, I got to get out of here. So this is the basic concept. We did a survey earlier this year for people, everybody on LinkedIn who's over, and it really had 22,000 people, so it was a pretty big survey around the world. And generally speaking, for everybody who were fully employed with at least 3 years experience, 23% said they were very active. 13% said they were tiptoers. 43% said they were explorers. 21 super passives. But I'm going to kind of modify that a little because that was the world. A lot of people just recently have joined LinkedIn, so I'm going to give you an update to that survey. But regardless, when we asked the super passive, would you even talk about it? I said, well, I'll talk about it. How to be extraordinary. They would talk, and 75% said they'd talk to a recruiter, but only under the condition that it was extraordinary. Explorers, would you be open to explore something? They said, yes, I would, but it better be significant. I've got a good job. I'm not desperate. I have to be a good job. Tiptoers, if they're still employed, much better job. Very active if they're good. Again, this is the top third. So the top third, I mean, super passive, everybody want to extraordinary explorer, but in the top third, these even you got to even be better than that. These people want something. They want more money. They want better jobs. They want better career growth. So you can't just offer job descriptions. If you want anybody in the top third, even if they're very active, you can't post job descriptions. So let me kind of take it one more further. This is where in our training we focus. How do you do a full court press? From a sourcing standpoint, a full court press is 40% networking, 40% Boolean search, heavy ERP, and 20% great compelling postings. It is really, you got to really divide your time amongst that. In our course, we go into the details of it. But the big idea is when you find candidates this way, you got to convince them. You got to first figure out where they are in this curve. Hey, Stephanie, how long have you been looking? What are you looking for in a new job? Very quickly, a few questions, you can figure out where they are in this curve, and you can figure out what you need to offer. But the idea is I got to push them to the left in the steeper part of the curve. And you got to sell that because that's what they do and become. The steeper part of the curve is what they do and become. Additional surveys on top of that for high demand positions in surplus is only 5% that are active. So if you don't have compelling ads that the person finds, you're not even going to find that 5%. Tiptoers were 20%. Explorers were 50%. This is additional surveys we did, a little more niche surveys, but additional on top of that, 25% super passive. The big point here is that 70% of the top third, you're not going to get through an ad. So if you're not, so then I go back. A lot of people said, yes, we're raising the talent bar, but you're using job descriptions and you're not focusing on the 70% who aren't looking. That's where you're going to get your top third. Otherwise, you're just going to hire the best people who apply. And if you got a great employer brand and you got plenty of good people applying, you can pull it off. But most companies aren't in that situation. So let me and feel free, guys, to ask questions now. We're right on time here, so don't hesitate to ask questions. I know Rod, I think it was Ron, you're down in Tokyo. Are you still with us here? I think Ron's got his hand raised. I don't know how long ago you put that in there, Ron, or Ronald, so I don't want to mispronounce your name. If you have a question, put it in the chat, and then we can unmute yourself. Let me put this chart up here that we can talk about. How do you get these different people? So the basic survey, 60% explorers or tiptoers. For the high demand, it's closer to 90%. But how do you find these people? Oops, what happened here? So I'm going to say the process to go after passive candidates. It is a different process. You got your names. I said it's the 40-40-20 plan. You got to build this talent pool. You got to do your Boolean search. You got to do it, and we go through our class. We show you how to build this talent pool, this list. How do you get these right people? How do you make the cold calls? How do you get in touch with them? How do you get referrals? There's a step. You got to go from a list of names to, hey, I'm actually talking to people. And you got to convince these people to become prospects. I asked Stephanie, would you be open to chat about a situation if it were clear? Yes, she's a prospect. Doesn't mean she's ready to apply. She's just ready to talk about a career move. And too many recruiters then sell, hey, Stephanie, let me tell you about my job. Well, that's not one. That's not a great job. We go through, how do you get, the key, I'll tell you this, I won't tell you what to say, but the key is you got to get the candidate to talk first. If you're talking, that's not recruiting. Recruiting is getting the candidate to sell you, not you selling the candidate. Oh, yeah, I'd like that job. Yeah, I would like to be interested. You go from candidate to finalist to a hire. LinkedIn Recruiter is a remarkable tool. But generally speaking, most recruiters use it. They don't make it the most use of it. They use the high-tech process. They try to find more candidates. They use a high-touch approach. I'm going to say to get the best people on LinkedIn Recruiter, you've got to use a high-touch approach. It's the combination of high-tech and high-touch. That's what performance-based hiring really is. It's the combination of those two things. So now I want to okay, let me do this. Steve's got a question. What are the main areas to sell in a superior career? Let me kind of go through that, Steve, and I'll tie this together. The key, this is really the foundation of performance-based hiring. It's the foundation of a talent surplus strategy or scarcity strategy. It's the how do you get recruiters to see your job as a career opportunity? And I want to kind of go through that now. And it does require knowledge of the job, and it does require good interviewing skills interlaced with good recruiting skills. So let me kind of go through this with you right at this moment. In 1997, I wrote a book. It's called Hire with Your Head. The original title was Hire with Your Head, A Rational Way to Make a Gut Decision. A couple of years after that, a book that outsold it by 100 to 1, First Break All the Rules by the Gallup Group, but had similar premises. What do the world's greatest managers do differently? I wrote another book, which was kind of an update, and I had 3 editions of Hire with Your Head, and the first edition of Hire and Getting Hired, the Essential Guide, came out last year, and a couple of them have been #1 bestsellers, sporadically. I think Hire with Your Head, the second edition, for about a month or so, was on all nonfiction books for, I think it even might have made New York Times, but certainly Amazon, #1 on Amazon. The point of all of the books is, and if you're familiar with Gallup's Q12, which was first originated in First Break All the Rules, it's what drives performance and satisfaction. Q12, the first 4, clarify expectations up front. Give me the tools to do the work I need, give me work I like to do, and help me become better at what I do. Google's Project Oxygen came out 2 years ago. Google did a 10-year study of all their managers, came up with basically the same thing. Tell me what I'm supposed to do and manage my performance that way. That's the key to performance-based hiring. The banishment, the complete banishment of skills-based job descriptions. Because if you use skills-based job descriptions, you cannot hire a top person. I don't know many top people unless you have this remarkable employer brand. You think about the top people, the top third. You say you have to do exactly the same work you've done, use exactly the same skills from the same industry, and you've got to consider your job a lateral transfer. And wait. Well, there aren't many top people who need to do that. So you filtered out most of the good people. This is a typical job description. I mean, this has got to be as bad. I just actually went on LinkedIn and found one. This is a well-known company looking for a systems engineer. It's actually a pretty good job. But you read it, strong organizational time management, customer focus, excellent oral written communications, presentation skills, interface with C-level, ability to multitask, experience in reviewing and providing feedback and customer clients in the formulation of engineering requirements and documents, possess an aggressive can-do attitude. Then it's got a bunch of skills. Typical travel, 25 to 50%, home office based, BS or equivalent, 3 years industry experience. That is not a top-level person. That is a clone. And I would actually say it's who would want this job? You got to be pretty desperate to want this job. So that's not a job description. It's a person description. Think about it. Most job descriptions define a person, not a job. So what I want to do is, hey, you look at what we have here. I say, what does this person need to do? So I have our quality of hire measure. Because we got to measure. Remember I said, hey, I can tell you what the financial ROI is, but I got to figure out what am I measuring to get that. How do I get 15% or 15% better than what? This is where we get through it. I tell this hiring manager, let's put the job description in the parking lot. What does a person need to do to be successful? And what would the person need to do to be considered in the top third? So what's the real job? Collaborate with sales reps. Okay, that's pretty cool. But what does a top third person do? Oh, they can instantly talk to C-level officers and explain very technical details. Whatever it is, I have to figure out how do I measure the top third? What is it in outcomes, a performance? They got to be able to real-time lead intense detailed product specs without looking at the documentation. They're in a big room. They got the CFO. Somebody's going to spend $10 to $50 million. We're making a big pitch there. This is the technical person who makes that pitch. If they can get in front of the toughest customers, they're definitely in the top third. We send our average people to less challenging companies. Why does it say they have to have good financial and business background? Oh, they're working with contracts and pricing and the CFO's group to make sure that every time there's a spec change, this person can control that we don't give it away. We want to maintain margins. Okay? And what does this multitasking look like on the job? I mean, a bank teller multitasks. Oh, no. They're handling 3 to 6 major projects with 3 to 6 different teams, with 3 to 6 different companies, and within each one of those things, there's probably 10 to 15 action items that this person has to not only do him or herself, but also coordinate with others. Okay, so that's where the real organizational skills. And I tell managers, I will find someone who can do this work. If they can do this work, I'm guaranteed to have exactly the skills and experience you want. That's what we call a performance-based job description. That's our B+ or better. If a person meets this criteria, now I've got somebody who is a top third person. Now I've got to interview the person. And I don't have time to go through this. At Talent Connect, I'm not going to be doing it as long as I just did there. What I do in the interview, when we teach this in our training class, is we dig deep into the person's most significant accomplishments. So if I was interviewing each one of you, you come into my office and say, hey, tell me about your most significant work you've ever done. Most significant work you've ever done. And I spend 5 or 10 minutes going through when did you do it, why did you do it, how did you do it, why were you chosen, what did you accomplish, how did you make the decisions. And I really create a word picture of your accomplishments. And then I start asking about, well, hey, you got to lead a big team on the technical level working with C-level officers at companies. Have you ever done that? Walk me through how you did it. So I start asking people about their most significant accomplishments in relationship to that performance-based job description. That's how, now obviously in our class we go through the details of it, but the idea is, in fact, I don't call it an interview, I call it a pre-hire performance review. Hey, we need this done. What have you done that's most similar? Walk me through it. And I might spend 5 to 10, 15, and actually 10 to 15 minutes on each one. What I do is I ask it multiple times. So I start seeing this trend line of performance over time. I ask about individual accomplishments, team accomplishments, job-related accomplishments. And I start looking at it over time. I ask people, so let's assume if I was talking with Terry, hey Terry, you're a software developer. In your first job, Who'd you work with? What about your second job? And I'm starting to see this growth of teams. Let me give you an example. A couple years ago, it's a couple years ago now, I was working on a controller spot for an entertainment company, small production company in Hollywood area. And I met a woman who was a director of accounting for one of the big studios. And she was 26 or 28. She had a great LinkedIn profile. She was clearly an achiever. She was going to get her MBA at USC. She worked at PricewaterhouseCoopers. And I started talking with her, and I said, Karen, on your first job, this is a real indicator the person's great. I said, on your first job at PricewaterhouseCoopers, she's 22 years old, hadn't been certified yet, working at PricewaterhouseCoopers New York. Who was your client? Because that's a good, good people get assigned better clients. Oh, I was working with at HBO. I said, oh, who are you working with there? Oh, I said, I was working with the CFO. I just assumed she met him or her. I don't know. I see him or her. I don't know. I guess it was a guy. I think she met him once. I was thinking that. I said, well, what did you work? What was it? Just a presentation? No. I worked on a real project, an international consolidation project that was going into Europe, and they had a real challenging accounting, and I was assigned a key role in that project. Well, you don't get at 22 or 23 years old, you don't get those projects unless you're pretty good. Then it turned out when she got her CPA 3 years later, that same person asked her to work for her. I don't know if it does. I'm not going to get into the details of it, but I met her when she was a director of accounting for a major studio here. I could clearly see in every case you could just see her growth, who she influenced, who she was assigned, the work she had done was clearly growing. Clearly a top third person, without question, very quickly. My client thought she was too light for the job. Turned out she probably was, but it was a tough. She came in second for the job, but clearly she was probably a top 5% person. Nonetheless, our questioning pattern allows you to do that. At least determine what the quality of hire is, because you still got to measure this. I'm still going back. While it's kind of cool to be able to hire the top third, how do you prove it? I need more money. I'm going to have to pay this person a little bit more. I can't have recruiters working 30 recs. I got to work 15 recs. Well, that's a huge increase. Hey, that's a lot of money. How do I prove that it's worth it? So that's what we do, and we have a proof of concept. We actually prove that this works. We take half a dozen assignments, half a dozen recruiters, they work them, and we prove it. We calculate the ROI for specific companies. And we put this information on a scorecard when we're interviewing the candidates. So the candidate scorecard is something we do. We have what's called a general formula for hiring success. By asking what I just defined here is that one question, digging deep into the company, is part of a structured interview. We ask a few more questions, but the idea is let's dig deep into the person's work history, find out their detailed accomplishments, get into their thinking skills. Then we take all of that data and we put it into a hiring formula. I'm not going to go through the details of it other than to say that our hiring formula looks at ability to do the work, which is this line up here, the top line in the upper right. The talent, hold on. Talent, management skills, team skills, thinking skills in relationship to the job itself. Everything we do is in comparison to the real job. That's critical. It has to be in comparison to the real job, the real manager, the real culture. Collectively, that drives motivation. We then put this in a scorecard, which is all these factors up here. And we rank the candidate on a 1 to 5 scale. It's always in comparison to the job. A 1 is the bottom third, a 2 is the middle third, 3 and above is the top third. A 3 is someone who's if you get all 3s in that, you're a top 20%, a very hireable person. I tell the manager, hey, I'm going to show you a lot of 3s. These will be in the top third in comparison to the work you wanted done. We use evidence to determine if the person is not feelings. The person, she didn't have good team skills. What are you talking about? She was very quiet. What are you talking about? She was just assigned this project at PricewaterhouseCoopers to do this and do that. And then at the next job, she was handled this project with all these kinds of folks that had never been done before. Wow, I didn't realize that. Evident, you can never out-yell a manager, but you can out-fact that person with evidence. But our system is we want to collect evidence to rank the person to determine if the person has a 3 or better. That is, after you wait 30 minutes, if you ask objective questions, yes, you can figure out it's a person of 1, meaning you wouldn't hire him, or is a person possibly a 5? But you can't discern the difference between a 2, 3, and 4. That really takes some work. So our whole focus is no 2s. Just make sure the person isn't a 2. Have they really done the work in our environment with our manager, and are they motivated to do it? So sometimes someone who's a top third can be very average or below average if the work isn't satisfying, or if someone who has done reasonably good work can excel in your situation if you have the chance to really evaluate and understand what that person's drivers and what that person's motivators are. So the idea from our whole process is we define the work, we dig deep into that person's accomplishments, we organize the interview so that all the managers, all the interviewers are focusing on 1 or 2 or 3 of these variables, and they own those variables. We get together, we debrief, we argue, we yell, but we have to use evidence to make the judgment. We make the hiring decision. It's not on the skills, it's not on emotion, it's not on some indirect means. It's, hey, has this person done comparable work? Is this person motivated to do comparable work? And they've done it in an environment and situation like we have. If they have, it's a high probability it'll be a great hire. That's how you raise the talent bar. Now, some people come back and say, oh, you can't do that. Can't do it. We got legal issues. Well, I say, what are the legal issues, guys? I talked to the #1 attorney, well, certainly the top 10 attorney at Littler Mendelsohn for this book. I went out to a top attorney who was, I got his name, he was a compliance OFCCP guy, and I mentioned, I'd like you to read the book and make your total judgment, your own call. He said, well, I don't think it's going to work, but I'll read the book. Here's what David Goldstein at Littler Mendelsohn after you've read it. Performance-based job descriptions are far more objective than skills-based job descriptions, skills, knowledge, and abilities. He said, unless the skills, knowledge, and abilities are correlated 80 to 90%, which they never are, they're correlated 50%, performance-based job description is much more objective. Hey, if they can do the work, they deserve the job. If they can't do the work, they don't deserve it. He says you'll never get sued if you use a, never get sued, or maybe you might get sued. You'll never lose a suit if you use a performance-based job description. You could lose one if you use skills SKAs. He also said focusing on what people do, not what they have, opens the doors to minorities, diverse candidates, and veterans. As long as they can do that work and do something comparable, they're in the game. It doesn't have to be the same industry. It doesn't have the same years. You don't need 10 years to do the work. Maybe you can do it in 2 years. He also said you don't need to post boring jobs. I don't post job descriptions. I don't even post performance-based job descriptions. I write stories. Probably should show you one, but we don't have time. In our class, we show you how to be very, that's one of our key things in the class. We really show you how to write creative ads that compel people to apply. And the structured performance-based interview that I've just defined here is fair, objective, and promotes greater diversity. So he said, this is a great system. I was totally wrong. I had my blinders on, thinking about what companies were doing. Never thought there was another way. He's a huge supporter of, and still a huge supporter of what we do. So there's no legal issues with respect to doing this. Let me kind of summarize, and I'm going to open it up for any questions you guys have. I made the contention, and you guys can say if I agree or not, is that everybody thinks they're raising the talent bar. Everybody thinks that they're hiring talent is an investment, but I contend they make it a cost expense, and they just really try to clone existing people, and they try to fit them within a box. Got to have these skills and fit within this salary range. We still want to hire great people, even though none of the great people exist. To hire the best people, you got to raise the talent bar, a different strategy based on totally different issues on what people can do and become. And you got to measure it to prove, because it probably will cost you a little bit more. That's what our calculator does. Goes through the calculations for you. But the real key is you got to think scarcity. Emphasize what people do and become. Attract them, don't weed them out. But you also got to control the conversation. You do have to raise the bridge or lower the water. You do have to define the work. And I tell managers, let's put this job description in the parking lot. This is a person description, not a job description. What does the person need to do to be successful? And I remember my first job, my first assignment was with a company looking for a plant manager, a wheel manufacturing company. Southern California, where I live, was in the late 70s and early 80s, was the center of the Beach Boy culture and the hot rods. So there's a lot of automotive accessory companies here. I knew the president of a wheel company made these hot rod chrome wheels. Needed a plant manager. Went out there. I said, let's just walk through your plant. Just walk through your plant. 20 minutes later, I knew what they needed to do. Change the chroming line. Change the raw material. Hey, we got to shop, whatever it was, I could walk through that plant, and I knew what that job was. Found somebody in 3 weeks. Never, and hey, could you do this work? So it never even became an idea of skills-based job descriptions. It was always about performance, but you had to define the work. Now, when I talk to candidates, and I think this is the key thing, that when you're talking with a past, I called Stephanie up. I said, Stephanie, be open to explore a situation that's clearly superior. I'm going to dig in and I'm going to find out from Stephanie, hey, tell me a little about yourself, Stephanie. What kind of background do you have? And what I do when I do that is I'm comparing Stephanie's background to the job. Stephanie, here's why I think this could be a career move. Could be. Managing a bigger team, we're going through launch. My concern about, and so I think you're going to be working with some senior executives. This is one of our biggest projects. My concern about your background, however, is you might have never been in this kind of fast-paced environment, making decisions in a real entrepreneurial way. We got plenty of money, but we got to get this done right. Now, if Stephanie's really a good person and really likes that, what is that candidate going to do? Is she going to try to sell me on her background, or is she going to kind of say, nah, I'm not interested? That was a question you can put in chat. The best people will sell you. They're going to say, no, well, I think I can do that. That's what recruiting is, guys. Getting the candidate to sell you. It's not you selling the candidate. The candidate has to see that as a career move because, Stephanie, I don't have enough money in a budget, but I will give you a 30% increase. 10 to 12% will be stretch. 10 to 12% will be in faster growth. 5 to 6% will be a salary increase. The only way I can get to that point is getting candidates to think strategically long-term of what they can do and become. And most passive candidates aren't even thinking about looking. But if you want to raise your talent bar, it also needs a good recruiter. And you have to understand where that person is. Stephanie was a Zone 1, Zone 2 explorer. The only way I could recruit that person is by showing it was a significant career move. And she has to not only sell herself, she's got to sell her friends and family and other recruiters she's working with. Recruiting is a critical job, and you cannot hire the top third without strong recruiters who have enough time to do it right. Obviously, the way you're going to do it is through networking and referrals, part of this, and a lot of our class is getting into the aspects of how do you actually do it. How do you network? How do you get referrals? How do you do your Boolean? How do you use LinkedIn Recruiter? What kind of right messages do you write? How do you talk to these people once you get them on the line? Then you got to interview these people. I mean, obviously, you got to get the interview right, and that's part of it. I have to have enough evidence about Stephanie that not only is she competent and motivated to do this work, but I got to defend her to a manager who might not make the judgment exactly that same way. I then have to close that person on, hey, you're not going to get as much money. And then I got to go to the manager, hey, I cannot do this all the time unless we have a little bit extra money. So collectively, let me kind of just finish, and I'll be happy to answer some questions here, guys. And we might want to mute a few people who have it there so we can at least engage in conversation. So the idea, here's what performance-based hiring is. So let me just kind of summarize and tell you what next steps are. It is an expert system, meaning there's probably other systems, but this one has been tried out by recruiters around the world to work year after year after year. It probably took me 6 to 7 years when I first started. There was no question. When I was a recruiter, I was as good as they got, and I'm very, very competitive. So if I heard any recruiter made more money than I did, I got better. So we've validated it. We've trained other recruiters. We know it works. There's other things that probably also work, so I don't want to exclude anything, but this does work. The idea is that we're focusing on what people can do and become. It emphasizes the performance-based interview, which is also a recruiting tool, also a defense tool. How do we get everybody, hiring managers, engaged using the same interview? That's a critical component. The hiring formula, which is ability over circumstances to drive motivation, drives our scorecard. That's how we measure quality of hire. To raise the talent bar, we got to increase assessment accuracy, and we got to measure pre-hire quality of hire. And you can actually think about this as our scorecard can be used both pre and post hire. I'm hiring Terry, I'm evaluating him this way against the job. Now 6 months later, I'm going to measure Terry again. Hey, is Terry's performance consistent with our predicted performance? The same direct measure. It's typically, well, we didn't do enough investigation here, the job changed, we didn't really focus on the manager, whatever it was. Differences can usually be assigned to something that can be corrected. So that's the basis of what we do here. If you'd like to go through our training, we have the last training for 2014 starts. We have an online training program. The last one starts November 7th. I don't exactly know the dates, November 7th. 14th, 21st, and I think it's the first week in December because we have Thanksgiving in there. Our manager program is the 7th and the 14th. They don't get every 7th and the 17th and the 7th and the 20th. They don't get everything. They just focus on how to define the job and how to do interviewing. We let talent leaders, meaning if you do have 3 or 4 or 5 recruiters underneath you, you're invited to audit module 1. We talked to you afterwards, hey, does it make sense to get everybody certified to go through the program? So let me kind of open it up. That's our program. I'm not going to do any more infomercials than that. Okay. Terry's question about how did I develop your ROI approach? Well, the way I would say I developed it, Terry, maybe you don't know my exact background. My first job after I got my MBA was a financial analyst at the 35th largest company in the country. Was working, and then 7 months later I was made manager of capital planning for a big industrial manufacturing company. So that's how I learned all about ROI. So intellectually, from a financial standpoint, that was not the challenge. The challenge was how do I equate financial information to that. And from a practical standpoint, you can the equation of what's the profit contribution per dollar is interesting. But there's a lot of assumptions built into it. But the reality is it almost doesn't matter. It's looking at measuring the difference in performance is where you can really get your ROI. So I don't know if that really answers your question, Terry. Might answer it a little bit. I'm more than happy to chat with you separately. You said the URL of that's a different question. David, are there any in Australia with staffing? Actually, David, I got a call. In fact, I can look that up. That's a great question. David asked me a question about, is it different for IT contractors? Now, I'm giving you a secret. You might be the guy that told me about this. I don't think it was. I got an email about 2 weeks ago from somebody who's an IT contractor. I thought he was in the UK. I thought he was in Boston or New York. I can't be positive. But he said, Lou, I've embedded your system totally into my practice. I do not send out resumes. I send out one-page summaries. Once I talk to my client, I find, in essence, what the big projects are. I then put one-page summaries together of my candidates. It has a picture of the candidate, has a very quick description of 3 or 4 projects they've worked on that's close by, and a 20-second audio interview with this candidate. This is what the guy told me. He created his own app to do this. He said based on that, they decide to see my candidate or not. And if they decide to see him, then we get more formal with respect to the interview and everything else afterwards. So that guy just took this concept and applied it to his business. He said, Lou, my business is probably 50 to 100% bigger as a result of doing that, and I thank you for it. I didn't get a dime for it. I think he went to our training, but nonetheless, so it does have great value. I think, so Stephanie says incorporating EQ screening. We actually incorporate EQ screening. However, I really don't like EQ screening in general, Stephanie, because it's not job specific. So this woman, Karen, who is a controller, I just said, what kind of teams? So I think you can get at EQ better than doing EQ screening just by asking people, what kind of teams you've been on, Stephanie? So here's this woman who is 22, is assigned to work on a cross-functional team at HBO, international team, reporting to the CFO, working with big international folks, working at different kinds of people. And in every job, she's always put on cross-functional teams. If I talk to a software development guy, I met this guy, Omer, probably about 3 months ago. He was a guy who was very quiet and introverted, but as I started talking with him, I said, Omer, he was a Ruby guy. I said, who's it? When you just started working over this company, which is a well-known company, all of a sudden this guy was like 24, 1 year experience, and all of a sudden he was put on these huge projects with marketing, products. He was even invited out to the customer for a new application. And I think when you find out what people have done with their team skills or emotional quotient, you'll discover that they have them. You don't have to measure them exactly. So that's why I tend to always feel about that by any competency. I don't know if that's a good answer for you, Stephanie, or not, but we've had a lot of people go through our competency test, but everyone who passes these filters tends to have it in spades because they've demonstrated that on the job. So it's not an indirect, it's a direct measure. I don't know if there's any other questions. JJ, did you see anything else?
No, I'm just scrolling through it, but I think we covered most of them.
Well, Steve has one. This will be the last one. And Steve, I don't know if you're still there. The best selling points to educate HM on the benefits of performance-based hiring. In our proof of concept, Steve, what we do is we try to find a couple of hiring managers who are open-minded. And if you find them, and it's probably 10 or 20% of most of the best managers, that's not true. The best managers, which are about 10 to 20% of all managers, already kind of do that. So now you just said, hey, what does this person need to do to be successful? And that's what Google found, and that's what the world's best managers already do that. So I didn't do it that way. I just knew that the best candidates wanted to know what they had to do. So that was really the essence of it, of how it happened. But we always do a pilot. Let's find a couple managers. Let's just introduce them to the concept, read the book, give them the book, which is chapter 2, how do you build a performance profile? And most of them say, yeah, I'll do that. I think that's the way it does. That's the way it works. Okay, guys, hopefully that's helpful. Liz, does that mean you're going to be at Talent? Maybe are you going to be at Talent Connect? If so, Liz, I look forward to seeing you there. Oh, I think you are. I think we're planning a meeting. In fact, I think I said I sent you an email. Hopefully this was helpful, Liz. This is a good setup for what I'm going to be talking about. So see what goes on here. Thanks, everybody. Hopefully this was helpful. We'll send you the audio recording. Ron, hopefully you hung in there, and hopefully this was valuable for you.
Great. Thanks, Lou. Thanks, everyone. You will be receiving